So anyway, there's that. Still waiting probably for a White House reaction to the Russian FSB grabbing a Wall Street Journal reporter who did 2 days ago. He did a terrific article about how the Russian economy is grinding to a halt, no matter what they say. And he went out to the hinterlands and he talked to manufacturers who were saying, I have parts that are on order. They're from Europe. They're from Volvo. I can't get them, and the whole thing. And so that's my last truck on the assembly line right there. And so it makes Russia, it doesn't put the Russian economy in the best light. So they did what the FSB does. They grabbed the guy and threw him to the floor, roughly. And I would tweet out a link to the story, but it's Wall Street Journal subscription. There's a paywall, and the whole thing. But here's CNN on their call. And by the way, if I don't know, the Russians are not going to shed a tear if every American media outlet pulls everyone back home to the U.S. But if I were them, I'd get their people out. That's all I'm saying.
This is a very, very fast-moving, developing situation, and we're not getting a lot of information, as you might expect, from the Russians, although we've been tracking the plight of this Wall Street Journal reporter for some time now, since he basically disappeared when he was on a reporting trip to the Russian city of Yekaterinburg, which is about 1,100 miles away.
And fun fact, that's Brittany Griner's team is in Yekaterinburg. So is
that true?
Yeah. That's where she was going. When she was going in, after the State Department said, everyone get out, she was going into Russia to return to Yekaterinburg for the freakishly tall women's league thing. And so maybe he should say, I'm here to clean out Brittany Griner's apartment or something.
From Moscow. But within the last couple of hours, the Russian FSB, the Secret Service, in other words, the successor organization to the KGB, has issued a formal statement saying that they terminated the illegal activity, as they phrase it, of an American journalist. They've named him as Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal.
And by the way, I think the guy that does the best coverage from inside Russia until he can't breathe normally is Steve Rosenberg from BBC. The guy speaks fluent colloquial Russian. The great thing he does is he translates newspaper articles and stuff like that. It's a great insight into their media messages and all this. And this is obviously retaliation for reporting the truth about the Russian economy, and also for the United States rolling up a so-called illegal, a guy coming here as a Brazilian, but he was actually a Russian agent. And if you remember, if you go back that far here in the Seattle area, remember when the FBI rolled up a spy ring of 6 people or so, including that redhead, that attractive redhead, some say, in Manhattan. And then there was that couple here in Seattle. They're here under, false identities, the whole thing. That's what makes them. It's like the Americans, like the FX show, The Americans. They're what's called illegals. And then Obama shut down the Russian consulate, not embassy, but consulate in San Francisco, where another hive of spies. But he did that. We sent him a note. There's a procedure. Send him a note. We're shutting down that consulate. Then do you remember that story where the Russian, their cryptology people were burning stuff, and the San Francisco Fire Department? So never mind all the niceties of how you shut down a consulate. The Russian crypto people were burning stuff, and there was a burn ban in San Francisco. So the San Francisco Fire Department just kicked the door down and said, "Hey, we're here to clean your pool." And so there you go. And so that was one of their number one. The consulate in San Francisco was one of their number one assets. It was clearly their number one asset west of the Mississippi, because they ran all their spying, their industrial espionage, everything came out of San Francisco. So now they have to rely on their illegals. So I don't know who you. It'll tell us how important the trade bait is going to be, how important they are to the Russians when they name their price for this guy. They're going to go through the entire performative thing about, look, he had a spy device on him. That's an iPhone. Right, look, he had binoculars or whatever. They'll go through that whole thing. And the Russians like a good perp walk. by the way. They will do a good perp walk.
They also understand buy low, sell high.
Yeah. Brittany Griner for Victor Boot. Yeah, any day, man. Any day.
Well, I lost half a day of skiing.
Thank you very much. Have fun.
So that's distracting all of us from the important stuff, which is the Gwyneth Paltrow ski trial. We'll be back to that here in just a second. AM 770 KTTH. Tiny houses were built from the money he said he raised. Well, the project didn't directly build any tiny. He's a very insensitive guy. Why does he always say homeless industrial complex? Folks, if you knew the bureaucracy behind the enablement of living like this, you'd be shocked. And they never publicize that. Local media doesn't do. There's no way to estimate. You can't wrap your arms around the 9 full-time positions for every homeless person. And there's a direct conflict of interest in relying on them to count the homeless and all thing. Camp Unacceptable is to the north of me under I-5. Camp Unbelievable. Well, I forget what the other one is. The one down by Mercer. That dead woman from last week had been rolled in a tarp and had been there for 4 days. And I'm going to go ahead and say move that one up the priority list. Get those people out of there. I'll go back there tomorrow morning. If they're rolling up the dead in the blue tarps, that's not what those were meant for, and I'll find one. But no, if someone, and this is a very Jonathan Show like thing, but if you were able to add up, and there's no central. No central database to track all of the various organizations that do this stuff, but they're not volunteers. I'll tell you that. Hey, the World Health Organization, they're still around. They updated their vaccination guidance. Guess what? Kids don't need it. Updated to reflect that much of the population is either vaccinated or previously infected with COVID-19 or both. The revised roadmap reemphasizes the importance of vaccinating those still at risk of severe disease, mostly older adults and those with underlying conditions, including with additional boosters. So
free fries when you get vaccinated? Vaccination. Yeah. I'm getting a very good feeling about vaccination right this moment.
Earlier, you wanted a gun. Now you're getting a gun and a wetsuit. So there's that. And for the record, my child was vaccinated by nature, and hasn't had it again since. So there's that.
Let's just go back to baseball theme songs.
We're all behind our baseball team. Go get 'em, Tiger. World Series bound and picking up steam.
Is that really Detroit?
Go get 'em, Tiger.
Let's compliment to the 253 who texted us that song from 1968, the Detroit Tigers theme song.
Let's see. Let me point this out. So the president of Taiwan is connecting to Central America through New York, and no word if she'll coincidentally meet anyone at JFK. Like the president or whatever. But the Chinese go ape about this because any sort of official recognition of President Tsai Ing-wen's office makes them just go nuts because they call it internal, interference with politics because it's a breakaway republic. It's not the Republic of China. It's not an independent country, the whole thing. And then she'll go to Central America and shore up relations with everyone but Honduras. The new president of Honduras, Castro, has been invited to Beijing to get her briefcase full of cash because earlier this week they unrecognized Taiwan and they committed to China. And so she'll get her just rewards. This should be, by the way, you should be sitting up and paying attention to this, whether it's Iranians in Venezuela or Chinese nearby one of the world's busiest waterways. They will bribe Honduras. They will bribe Tegucigalpa with hydroelectric, with paved roads, with a rail system and the whole thing. And all they'll need in return is some foreign basing rights for the Chinese Navy and the whole thing. And they'll make a world-class port in Honduras. and they will promise to jumpstart the economy and the whole thing. That's what they do. That's how they do it. And so this should be a bigger story than it is here in the U.S., but it's kind of a dense news day. But on that one thing, yes, the Chinese are very much interested in making us react to them in our hemisphere. Keep in mind, they've been dealing with Americans in their neck of the woods for a century and a half, and they don't like it. Now that they're more assertive, this is selling really well in China, that, the Americans try to contain us. Well, so with the United States, with Australia, UK, US, and along with the help of Japan and now the Philippines and all that, this idea that we're panning China in with what's called the first island chain, which would be Japan, Taiwan, even Korea, and that China's Navy would not have a way to break out in the event of war and hunt down American aircraft carriers and the whole thing. They dislike that intensely. So they said, well, why don't we just go out before they can close the fence? Let's just go out to Honduras. And so they're courting governments like Honduras, and it's working. And governments like the Solomons and the whole thing, they're saying, well, what if we're already out? What if we already have a naval base there? Then what? And, I don't know. We don't have time to get into it, but what's really funny to me is how they concentrate on some of the world's most vulnerable choke points in shipping. There's this thing called the Suez Canal, and there's a thing called the Red Sea. At the base of the Red Sea is a place called Djibouti, and if you control that strait between Yemen and the continent of Africa, then you control the Suez Canal. Remember that? What was that ship 2 years ago that went sideways in the Suez Canal?
Oh, that's right. And it was the subject of countless memes.
Oh, my God. And it was like the first time people had ever heard supply chain disruption. And it impacted, within days, the manufacturing of American cars was impacted and all that. Well, there's a sort of an analog, only it's on a canal, in the Indonesia Singapore area. There's a thing called the Malacca Strait. You can go from the Indian Ocean in the Pacific, but you have to go through a very narrow choke point. And then there's a thing called the Panama Canal, and you'll find that we were central to its construction, I believe. And the Chinese have been working. They keep working on a wider replacement canal. Someday maybe they'll replace it or something. But them getting a foothold in Honduras is a canary in the coal mine, because it points to a larger strategy where China doesn't care about freedom of navigation, but they do care about choking freedom of trade. And one day, if the balloon ever goes up, it'll start with the Chinese choking off trade routes. The Chinese understand water commerce. They understand shipping commerce. They rely on it. They rely on oil tankers getting there and their stuff getting here, getting to Port of Tacoma, getting to Port of Seattle. They get that. You and I, we drive by it. Hey, those are big cranes, but that is how, name the car company, that's how they get their spare parts, their alternators, whatever. If you're waiting on your electric Ford F-150, I got news for you. The guy is still making the motor in Shanghai. So anyway, it's a big deal that they're rewarding small countries for recognizing China and unrecognizing Taiwan, because that is the ball game. All right. Well, for this practiced Friday, tell you what, for checking your texting, 800-465-8770. We'll curate your texts. We'll read your texts and tell you about a interesting fun fact. The movie Tetris on Apple comes out tomorrow. Interesting story. Absolutely everybody knows the game. It crosses generations. Even my daughter, she has Tetris on her phone. And her phone has probably 1 million times more computing power than a Game Boy did. But some interesting fun facts about one of the co-developers in a story. And I'm really hoping in this movie, I hope they emphasize the Nintendo Redmond connection with Tetris, and because that is the story, really, and the fate of one of the two founders and what it indicated when that happened in 1998.
And it is common in video games to choose your fighter. Perhaps we can apply this to the Jamal Bowman Thomas Massey showdown on Capitol Hill yesterday.
Oh yeah,
they have control of the House. The American people need to know that they don't have the courage to do anything to save the lives of children. Are you listening to what I'm saying? Calm down, children are dying. I was a teacher, I was a school counselor, I was a middle school principal. I was in cafeterias protecting kids every day of my career.
There's never been a shooting.
Sounds productive.
And I know. Yeah, yell at me. Oh, what? Oh, look over there. There's a camera.
Make sure there's reporters there while you do it.
Pure performance by Bowman, who, like you say, never heard of the guy until he was arguing with Byron from Florida on the steps of the Capitol. And Thomas Massey is getting all kinds of kvetching from liberal media because he's the one who did that Christmas picture where every one of he and his wife are sporting ARs and the kids are sporting AR-15s and the whole thing. And you know what? The guy gets reelected. He's a uber libertarian guy. He's way too libertarian for me on his foreign policy. He's way too Rand Paul-y for me on that stuff, and absolutely can't recognize America's role in the world. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, there's really not there's no one to the right of him. So thank golly for him. And but anyway, they put that picture up on MSNBC because most people that are watching MSNBC are shocked that children would have safe access and training to firearms. Also, when we come back, yes, if you're in Seattle, you're in the first city to mandate paid sick leave for gig workers. I thought, isn't that the opposite of the point of gig work? I don't know. Anyway, back in a second. The checking of your texting, 800-465-8770. 800-465-8770. Back in a shake on AM 770 KTTH.
Time for a new look in your kitchen? Hi, Chad Cicchini, owner of Heritage Homecraft. Turn your kitchen into the beautiful showplace that it ought to be and save thousands. Call me for a free estimate. Heritage Homecraft, 425-485-1600. That's 425-485-1600 or Heritage Homecraft.
The experts. It was a good show. So the movie Tetris comes out tomorrow. Oh, and I've got the guy who plays where's a picture of him? The guy who plays the Dutchman, who was the intermediary between the Tetris developers and Nintendo, was Hank Rogers from De Holland, from the Dutch. Hank Rogers. And he's played by the kid who was in the Kingsman.
5 minutes. I still see falling blocks in my dreams. It's poetry, art, and math all working in magical synchronicity. It's the perfect game. Tetris?
Tetris. I don't get it.
I had no idea about this backstory.
So anyway, they interview him and he gives answers, and it's really interesting. So the game was developed by two developers who were trained psychologists, which was a very honest, open, important position in the Soviet Union. The KGB used psychologists left and right. But Alexei Pajitnov and Vladimir Pokilko. So obviously you're thinking, oh, they invented Tetris. My God, they must have been billionaires. Well, no. The Soviet Union owned that game. So that's who got to broker it, the whole thing. Well, no big surprise there. Pajitnov and Vladimir Pokilko came to the United States as soon as they could. Pokilko started a company called Animec, is that what it's called? But anyway, it was sort of the first attempt at use of depth. He was trying to do like a 3D Tetris with fish, sort of. And the game hello, I has it. And so they moved to Palo Alto, and his company, Animatech, was in trouble. He was not paid what he should have been paid for Tetris. Now, at that time, it was a gold rush. Legit money was there. Illegitimate money was there. The Russian mob is the overseas branch of the KGB and now the FSB. And they were the first wave to L.A. and San Francisco and Portland in the late 80s, early 90s. The first guys on the plane who got to leave, the first wave of immigrants, large immigrants out of the Soviet Union, were dominated by mobsters. And they did all kinds of scams and the whole deal. Their signature deal was to put bodies in dumpsters without hands or heads. And they would separately, that's what they did in the Soviet Union. They robbed you of dental